I was playing a cartoon on my laptop for our 2-year-old when message windows popped up. One said, "Last night was amazing. When can we see each other again?" That's how I found out my wife cheated, even 6 months pregnant. I always thought the quiet hours of the morning were the safest part of the day. When the sun hadn't fully settled, when the world still carried that soft gray light, when my son Milo still walked around sleepy and warm, there was something comforting about those moments. That morning, though, was the day the floor under my life cracked without warning. I opened my laptop just to run a short cartoon so Milo would stay entertained long enough for me to finish packing his bag for daycare. I remember how he climbed onto the couch, wrapped himself in the blanket, and waited like this had become the ritual of every morning. I had no reason to expect anything unusual, so when the screen flickered and the cartoon started buffering, I walked back to the kitchen to cut fruit for him. Then I heard the sound of message notifications. Not one or two, but several in a row. At first, I thought it was a group chat or some old thread waking up again. I didn't think much of it until I went back to adjust the volume and saw windows stacking on the screen faster than they closed. Each message came from the same sender. I didn't recognize the name. The first line I read was enough to freeze everything inside me. It referenced a night that matched exactly to a date when Lacey had claimed she was at her mother's place to rest because the pregnancy had drained her. The tone of the message wasn't playful or innocent. It was familiar. The kind of familiarity that required time, consistency, and something deeper than a mistake. My hands went cold, but I didn't close the laptop. I stood there and scanned upward through the older messages. There was a pattern. The nights lined up with the nights she told me she needed space. The messages aligned with moments when she had explained she was visiting a friend for emotional support. She wasn't emotional in those messages. She was arranging meetings, giving instructions, and describing my home in a way that made my stomach twist. The messages described how Dorian, the sender, liked the way she decorated the nursery. The nursery door had been shut that evening because I had been painting trim and told her to avoid the smell. Only someone in that room could have mentioned that detail. That realization hit me harder than the messages themselves. It meant someone had been in my house without my knowledge. Someone had walked near my son's crib. Someone had stood in the part of the home I thought was built on hope. I closed the message window only after I was sure I couldn't look at another line without losing the ability to think straight. Milo tugged on my pants to tell me the cartoon froze again, and I snapped back into the moment. I restarted the cartoon and tried to speak with the same tone I always used, but my voice didn't sound like mine. For the rest of that morning, I watched Lacey as if she had been replaced by a stranger wearing her face. She woke late, walked around the house slowly, and acted tired. She gave me a quick greeting before making her way to the bathroom. I watched her brush her hair in the mirror, standing in the same spot she had stood countless times, yet I no longer saw the woman I married. I saw someone who had been living a second life under my roof. The longer I watched her, the more signs appeared. She clutched her phone tighter than usual. She checked the screen with a nervous motion, as if she had messages waiting, and she slipped it into her hoodie pocket the moment she saw me. She took a shower that lasted far longer than necessary, and left the bathroom smelling like a perfume she didn't normally use. She explained nothing. She didn't need to. The messages had already spoken for her. I left the house with Milo, pretending nothing was wrong. I wanted space to think without her watching me. I dropped him at daycare and drove to a small parking lot behind a pharmacy. I sat there with the laptop open again, reading through the messages a second time. The threads told the same story but in deeper detail. There were references to moments when she was 6 months pregnant and still meeting him. They spoke about how she handled the baby moving inside her during one meeting. That detail twisted something inside me. I felt the kind of pressure that didn't show on the face but squeezed the inside of the ribs. I didn't want to act impulsively. I needed clarity. I needed to understand the timeline. So I wrote down dates, messages, times she left the house, excuses she made. Everything fit too perfectly to be coincidence. I worked through the rest of the day like a ghost moving through routines. By the time I returned home, I noticed new details I had never paid attention to. Her shoes were near the back door, not the front. Her coat smelled faintly like someone else's cologne. She said she had gone for a walk. She didn't usually walk near the woods where that scent came from. That night, while she sat in the living room scrolling through her phone with her legs curled under her, I noticed another detail. She smiled at something on her screen. It wasn't a general smile. It was a smile of recognition, something reserved for someone who gives comfort. She quickly turned her screen away when I walked past, pretending she was reading a recipe. Later, I took out the trash and ran into our neighbor, Nadine. She was the quiet type who mostly kept to herself unless something caught her attention. She mentioned casually that she had seen a man leave through our backyard gate a few months earlier when Lacey was heavily pregnant. She thought he was someone I hired for renovations. He had no equipment. He carried nothing. He left quickly. I asked lightly if she remembered anything else, and she hesitated before saying she thought he looked too familiar with the house, like someone who had been there enough times to know the layout. That detail sank into the back of my mind like a weight. It connected to the nursery message from earlier. It connected to everything. Before going to bed that night, I rechecked the messages and found one line I hadn't noticed earlier. It referenced how Dorian missed a small wooden toy on Milo's dresser and wanted to bring something similar next time. He had seen the toy because he had physically been in the room. That realization closed whatever part of me still hoped for a misunderstanding. The man had been in my home. He had been near my son. He had been familiar with details only a person physically present could have known. And Lacey had let it happen. That night, while she slept beside me with her breathing slow and steady, I lay awake and decided the next step. I wasn't going to ask questions until I had the full picture. I wanted the truth to reveal itself completely because I had already crossed the point where trust ended. This was only the first step into something far deeper than I expected, and I felt the shift as clearly as if the house itself had tilted. The morning after everything shifted, I walked through the house with the awareness that nothing inside it belonged to the version of my life I thought I had. Milo played with a small truck near the coffee table, humming to himself. The innocence in that sound grounded me long enough to know that whatever I did next had to protect him above everything else. The messages still replayed in my mind, their timestamps and tone carrying weight I could not ignore. Lacey moved around the kitchen preparing cereal, trying to act normal. She kept glancing at me, probably sensing a change in my energy. I saw the subtle difference in her movements, a kind of careful calculation I never noticed before. She seemed almost rehearsed. She kept her phone within reach, never letting it out of her sight, which made the atmosphere feel even heavier. I took Milo to daycare again because I needed the day open for answers. When I returned home, I pretended to have forgotten my wallet so I could walk back inside. I watched from the hallway as she sat on the couch, texted someone quickly, and deleted something as soon as the screen lit up. She didn't know I saw. She didn't know I had already memorized the rhythm of her lies. I left without saying anything, but I knew one thing for sure. I needed to see where she went during these sudden errands. I waited 2 hours before circling back near the house, parking a block away. The timing was perfect. She stepped outside with a tote bag and walked briskly down the street toward a coffee shop that had closed months ago due to a renovation dispute. She didn't have coffee on her mind. She headed straight to the back of the building. I stayed far enough back to avoid looking suspicious, but close enough to see who she met. A man stepped out from behind the building, adjusting the collar of his jacket. It was Dorian, the same name from the messages. He touched her arm in a way that suggested this was routine. She looked at him with a familiarity that cut deeper than anything in the chat logs. They spoke with their bodies, with their ease, with the way they stood close enough for their shoulders to brush. I could have walked up to them. I could have confronted them right there. Instead, I stayed hidden because I wanted confirmation that went beyond words. I wanted to understand the full scope of the betrayal before showing my hand. Lacey leaned into him briefly, and he placed his hand on her waist. That moment told me everything I needed. They didn't stay long. She gave him a small envelope before leaving. He tucked it into his jacket and walked toward the main road. I stayed in the shadows, letting the anger spread like heat under the skin until it settled into something sharp and controlled. On my way back home, I saw Nadine sweeping her porch. She glanced at me with a cautious expression. I walked over and asked lightly if she remembered anything else about the man she saw leaving my backyard months earlier. She hesitated, then said something that shifted the entire picture again. She mentioned how she noticed the man leaving through the back gate on more than one occasion. She remembered one afternoon when Lacey was pregnant and the man arrived while I was at work. She thought he was a friend of mine doing me a favor. Her tone changed when I told her he wasn't a friend. That confirmation tightened everything inside me, but I thanked her and went home without revealing anything. My hands shook slightly as I unlocked the door. The knowledge that someone walked freely through my home, with permission from the woman who shared my bed, added weight to every step I took inside. Later that evening, while Lacey prepared dinner, I checked our joint banking account on my laptop. The numbers didn't make sense. Several withdrawals had been made from an ATM near a hotel 2 towns away. Hotel receipts showed charges made under her card, but sent to an email I didn't recognize. She had rented rooms more than once in the past year. The dates matched the messages. They also matched days she claimed she needed to visit her mother for rest. I felt a hollow space open in my chest as I scrolled through the receipts. She had paid for rideshare trips under a different name. She had used our finances to sustain her secret life. She hadn't just betrayed our marriage. She had used our savings to fund the collapse of our future. By the time she came into the living room to ask if I wanted to watch a movie, I couldn't look at her the same. Her voice sounded rehearsed. Her smile looked practiced. She walked around the room as if she was waiting for messages from someone who mattered more than the family in front of her. It made the walls feel smaller. That night, while she slept, I opened the laptop again and dug deeper. I found messages describing how she wanted to hide her ring during certain meetings because it felt wrong to bring it into those moments. She had taken it off willingly. That detail stung in a different way. The ring represented a commitment we built slowly, a symbol I thought meant something to her. She removed it for someone else. The next morning, I checked the car she usually used. I didn't expect to find anything. I just needed to know if there were more secrets hiding in plain sight. When I opened the passenger side door, a small metallic sound hit the ground. Her ring. It had fallen near the door pocket and slid out when I pulled it open. The ring lay on the pavement, catching the light. It wasn't scratched. It wasn't damaged. It had been kept safe, just not for the right person. That discovery pushed me past the internal barrier that had kept me steady. It proved she wasn't confused or overwhelmed or lost in a temporary lapse. She had been living a parallel life with someone else while pretending to be devoted at home. I took Milo out for the afternoon because I needed distance. While he played at the park, I sat on a bench and considered the next steps. I knew I couldn't keep collecting evidence forever. Eventually, I would need to confront her. I just didn't want to do it while Milo was awake, because the moment of truth would not be calm. Before going home, I stopped by my workplace to pick up documents I needed for the week. My boss, Victor, asked if everything was fine. He noticed I had been distant in meetings. I almost told him everything, but I held back. Something kept me from talking about it outside the home. Maybe I needed to stay silent until the confrontation happened. When I returned home with Milo, the atmosphere hadn't changed. Lacey walked around with her phone in her hand. She acted restless, pacing between rooms. She didn't ask about our day. She didn't show interest in the bag of groceries I brought. Her distraction became a constant presence. Later that evening, she stepped outside for a call and left the back door slightly open. I walked near it quietly, and for the first time heard her tone shift in a way that felt foreign. She spoke softly, reassuring someone, giving times and details, promising something for the weekend. She hung up quickly when she heard movement inside. She walked back in and acted casual, but her eyes didn't meet mine. She moved around the house like she had already left emotionally, like her mind was orbiting another life she had carved out of lies. That night, after she fell asleep, I watched her breathing remain steady and peaceful. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, planning how to uncover the full truth without giving her space to manipulate the story. I needed the next move to be precise, because every place she walked, every breath she took, every corner of our home had become part of a story I had been forced to read without consent. The lies weren't slipping anymore. They were spilling. Everything was headed toward impact. The day I decided to confront Lacey felt strangely calm at the start. Milo was at daycare. The house was quiet, and the air carried that stillness that usually came before something irreversible. I waited until she finished a phone call in the kitchen. She talked in a light tone, pacing near the sink, rolling her hair around her finger. She did not realize I was watching. She hung up quickly when she sensed movement in the hallway. For a moment, we stood facing each other in the living room. The silence between us felt heavier than anything we had shared in months. I told her we needed to talk, and she followed me into the room as if she feared refusing would reveal something. I sat across from her, trying not to let anger distract from the clarity I needed. I began telling her what I saw on the laptop and how the messages appeared without warning. I didn't raise my voice. I described the dates, the details, the references to the nursery. I watched her expression shift slowly from confusion to calculation. She attempted to deny everything at first. She said I must have misunderstood. She said someone else must have accessed her account. She tried to spin explanations that didn't align with logic. I explained that the timestamps aligned with moments she claimed she was with her mother. I pointed out the hotel charges under her card and the rideshare trips that matched the messages. She tried again to redirect, insisting she needed space and had taken trips to clear her mind. She claimed the man in the messages was someone she barely knew, someone who exaggerated things. The more she spoke, the more her story collapsed. She tripped over her own claims. She contradicted herself. She insisted she had only met Dorian once. I reminded her that the messages referenced months of interactions. I told her I saw her meet him behind a cafe. I described the way he touched her arm and how she handed him an envelope. Her denial shifted into desperation. She tried to blame stress, exhaustion from the pregnancy, emotional confusion. She tried to redirect attention toward how she felt overwhelmed. But every excuse sounded thinner than the last. I had evidence that didn't bend under her narrative. She started tearing up not from guilt, but from fear of losing control of the situation. As things escalated, a knock sounded at the door. It startled both of us. Lacey's expression changed immediately. She looked toward the hallway with a mix of anxiety and expectation. She rushed to open the door before I could stand up. It was her cousin Harris. He walked inside with a familiarity that struck me as wrong. He glanced quickly at me, then at Lacey, and asked in a firm voice what was happening. She whispered something to him, clearly trying to enlist him as backup. He looked at her, nodded, then turned to me with an expression that carried more confidence than he deserved. I asked why he was here. He explained that Lacey called him earlier, saying she needed someone on her side because I was accusing her unfairly. He positioned himself between us in a way that felt staged, like he had been preparing for this role. He tried to reason with me, telling me that relationships go through difficult phases. He spoke as if I were overreacting, as if the evidence didn't matter. I told him this was not his conversation. He disagreed. He said family needs to support each other, especially during misunderstandings. When I repeated what I had discovered, he shifted uneasily. His voice wavered for a moment before he regained composure. The change was small, but enough for me to notice. I pressed him, asking if he knew about the man. He hesitated for a second, and that hesitation told me everything. He attempted to mask it with a sigh, acting as though this situation exhausted him. Then he admitted that he knew she was talking to someone else. He claimed he didn't know the details, only that she needed emotional support and that the person made her feel understood. I told him the messages were not emotional support. They were physical, specific, and undeniable. Harris began pacing the room, rubbing the back of his neck, trying to deflect. He insisted I should let it go for Milo's sake. That phrase felt like an insult. Let it go. Ignore messages about my wife meeting a man in my home. Pretend she didn't bring someone near our newborn. Act like nothing had happened. I asked Harris directly how long he had been covering for her. He stopped pacing. His shoulders tightened. He tried to claim he had never covered anything. I pushed again, mentioning the afternoon Nadine had seen a man leaving through the backyard gate. That detail caught him off guard. He asked how I knew. His immediate reaction confirmed his involvement. I told him to answer the question. His voice cracked slightly as he admitted that he had helped her once or twice. He said she had asked him to watch Milo one afternoon so she could meet Dorian privately. He tried to frame it as an act of compassion, saying she needed clarity during a stressful time. He told me she felt lonely. He told me she needed someone who understood her emotional struggles. His justification made the room feel narrower. I asked him why he would take Milo out of the house so she could meet another man in our home. He stuttered, trying to find a way to make that sound reasonable. He failed. He said he didn't think it would hurt anyone if it helped her figure things out. He acted as though protecting her emotional comfort was worth more than protecting the stability of our family. Lacey tried to interrupt, insisting that everything was complicated. She said I was misinterpreting their intentions. She told me the messages looked worse than they were. She tried to turn the blame toward me, insisting that the distance between us created the gap she filled. She said nothing about accountability, only about how she felt pressured. I confronted her again about the ring I found in Dorian's car. Her face drained of color. She didn't try to deny that part. She only said it must have fallen by accident. I asked her how it ended up in his door pocket at all. She had no answer. Harris attempted to interject, saying some things shouldn't be scrutinized too deeply. That statement alone made everything inside me harden. The confrontation spiraled. Voices rose. Arguments collided. Lacey switched between denial, justification, and emotional manipulation. Harris kept shielding her, insisting she was fragile and needed compassion. He spoke as if I were attacking her without cause. At one point, I asked who else knew about the affair. Harris avoided the question at first, but I pressed harder. Eventually, he admitted that 2 of her friends knew. They had encouraged her to take time away from me. One of them even lent her a car when she needed to disappear for a weekend. That layered betrayal settled into my mind like a heavy stone. I stood in my own living room listening to a cousin who had facilitated the affair, a wife who had built a second life, and a truth that stretched deeper than I expected. The tipping point arrived when Harris finally revealed that he had once let her meet Dorian in his own garage. He said it as if it were a minor favor. He tried to claim he only did it because she needed privacy. That detail hit harder than anything Lacey had confessed. They had turned multiple homes into meeting spots. They had used spaces meant for family gatherings and filled them with choices that undermined everything we had built. I didn't shout. I didn't lash out. I stood there feeling a sense of distance grow inside me. The marriage had already collapsed. The confrontation only confirmed how deep the cracks went. When Harris finally left, he gave me a look filled with irritation, as if I had made his day difficult. Lacey stood there looking drained, but not remorseful. She seemed more upset that the situation was exposed than that it existed. That night, I slept in the guest room. The air felt heavier than ever, but clarity settled in me. I knew part 4 would require action instead of talk. The damage had been done. The consequences would follow. The morning after Harris left the house felt like the first day after a storm that had stripped every branch bare. Nothing looked the same, even though everything sat exactly where it had been the day before. Lacey moved around the kitchen like someone trying to repair something already shattered. She kept her voice low when she spoke to Milo, but her eyes stayed fixed on me in a way that made it clear she hoped the confrontation could somehow be undone. It couldn't. I had spent most of the night in the guest room thinking through the next steps. I realized the situation stopped being about betrayal alone. It had become a question of stability, safety, and the future of a child who had never asked for any of this. That thought gave me the clarity I needed. The plan had to be straightforward. No shouting, no accusations, only actions. While Lacey prepared breakfast, I told her calmly that I was meeting with someone that afternoon to discuss separation. She stared at me as if she didn't understand the meaning of the words. She tried to approach me, reaching for the edge of my sleeve, but I stepped back. She froze in place. Her breath became uneven. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. I didn't stay for a conversation. I took Milo to daycare and drove directly to a legal office I had already contacted. The attorney I met, a steady and grounded man named Clayton, listened carefully while I walked him through the evidence. I showed him the messages, the receipts, the hotel bookings, the rideshare trips, and the notes I made on timelines. When I mentioned the man entering my home without my knowledge, he paused and asked me to repeat it. When I told him about the ring found in Dorian's car, he leaned back and started writing additional points I hadn't considered. He explained that matters involving a child's exposure to strangers carried significant weight in custody evaluation. He also explained that using joint funds to support an affair demonstrated financial irresponsibility. He said the information I had collected placed me in a strong position. I didn't feel strong. I felt empty. But I nodded and continued. Later that afternoon, I returned home early because that was the day everything had to be laid out. Lacey stood in the hallway waiting for me like someone who had spent hours rehearsing a speech she hoped would fix everything. She tried to talk about working things out, about therapy, about repairing the marriage. Her voice cracked in every sentence. She kept adjusting her hoodie sleeves as if the movement could somehow help her regain control. I listened in silence until she finished, then asked her one question. I wanted to know whether she understood the magnitude of what she had done. Her answer made it clear she didn't. She said mistakes can be overcome. She said relationships face temptations. She said her intention had never been to hurt me. That statement created a distance so wide that even standing a few feet apart felt like opposite sides of a canyon. I told her I had already begun the process to separate our lives. She tried to argue again, insisting she had ended things with Dorian. That claim didn't matter. The timeline was long enough. The damage was permanent. When she realized I wasn't bending, her frustration shifted into panic. She begged me not to take Milo away from her. I told her the courts would decide, not me. I wasn't trying to punish her. I was protecting the child who had been unknowingly placed in unsafe proximity to strangers through her decisions. She tried to insist the man was harmless. That argument collapsed under the weight of its own absurdity. The next days moved quickly. She contacted her family to defend herself, but most of them remained distant when they heard there was evidence. A few attempted to reach me to claim the situation must have been misunderstood, but I didn't engage. I focused on preparing for mediation. The hearing arrived sooner than expected. We sat across from each other in a small, neutral office. The mediator asked for clarity on the claims. I presented the messages first, then the receipts, then the timeline. Lacey tried to interrupt numerous times, insisting she could explain everything. The mediator asked her to wait. When she finally had the chance to speak, her explanations fell apart almost instantly. She said she had needed company during pregnancy. She said the meetings were brief. She claimed she never intended for it to continue. But the messages showed details that contradicted every statement. The hotels told another story. The ring in Dorian's car told another one. The backgate visits confirmed more. The mediator asked whether the man had been inside the home. She looked down and hesitated just long enough to answer the question for herself. She said she didn't remember. That response did more damage than an admission. When the mediator asked about other people who knew, she said almost no one. I didn't need to speak. The messages referenced friends covering for her. She didn't realize the mediator had already read them. The room fell silent when she realized the contradiction. At one point, the mediator asked whether the child had ever been present during these meetings. She swore he hadn't. That was when I explained the detail Harris had admitted in the living room. Lacey's head dropped into her hands. The mediator wrote something quickly on her pad. It was the moment everything shifted decisively toward my side. After the mediation ended, Lacey sat in her car for a long time. She didn't drive home right away. She just sat there staring at the steering wheel. I didn't approach her. I drove back to the house to prepare for the next phase. A few days later, I received a message from Victor, my boss. He said he needed to talk to me privately. I met him in his office, expecting something related to work. Instead, he asked if the name Dorian meant anything to me. My stomach tightened. I asked why. He told me something I hadn't expected. Months earlier, Dorian had applied for a position at the company. He had listed me as a reference. I never received a call about it. Victor said the application stood out because of the reference discrepancy. It wasn't common for someone to list a reference without informing them. Victor said the whole thing felt off. The discovery shocked him once he connected the dots. That information settled into my mind like the final piece of a puzzle I never wanted to see complete. The affair hadn't been random. The man had known who I was. He inserted himself into my life deliberately. That detail alone reinforced everything the mediator needed to finalize decisions. Within a month, the ruling arrived. I received primary custody. Lacey was granted limited visitation until further evaluation. She was required to move out of the house. She took a small apartment across town. She lost access to the joint account and was ordered to contribute child support once her employment stabilized. Her extended family, after seeing the evidence, offered little support. Harris cut contact with me entirely, but that loss felt like a relief. As for Dorian, his situation crumbled as well. His partner discovered the messages. He lost the job he had at a small marketing firm after a co-worker recognized his name from the mediation document that circulated among legal clerks. He confronted me once in a parking lot, attempting to apologize. I walked past him without responding. There was nothing left to hear. The house became quiet again. Milo adjusted faster than I expected. Children sensed stability more than explanations. I rebuilt routines slowly, morning by morning, structuring a new life around certainty rather than the illusion I used to live inside. One evening, as I closed the laptop after finishing work, I realized something. The same device that had revealed everything also marked the moment I regained clarity. It didn't feel symbolic. It felt practical. The truth had been forced into the open, and every outcome that followed came from choices made long before I discovered the message windows. Life didn't return to what it had been. It moved forward into something steadier. And that was enough.